from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kaylee Lines.
President Trump says twice a year is enough. Welcome to the Monday edition as the president urges the SEC to stop requiring quarterly earnings reports instead of, in this case, twice a year, despite the law that says otherwise. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kriti Gupta, who's in for Kaylee today in Washington. Kriti, great to have you back with us here in the mix. This is something that may not work exactly the way the president wants to and could, in fact, require a change in the law.
Is there a tariff story embedded in here somewhere that if this is a transitory story, maybe if you report in 6 months instead of 3, gives you a little bit more time to work out those kinks? I don't know.
Maybe.
Just a theory.
I like where you're going there. The president's making a lot of news, though, via social media. Also today announcing the framework for a deal to save TikTok.
Yeah.
He says young people are going to be very excited about this. We don't know exactly what the framework is, though, or how this is going to work.
We don't know, but we do know that the last time we revisited this story, there were plenty of suitors.
Yep.
None, perhaps the richest man, I believe now, is Larry Ellison over at Oracle,
right,
which we know does the cloud or offers the cloud services for TikTok. So this is a market-moving story, not just one for the youth, as the president says.
Well, that's a good point, although we may have to wait a minute. The president's heading to the UK tomorrow, and he's not going to be speaking with President Xi until Friday. So we could have a few days to wait to really find out what's under the hood here. Scott Bessent announcing the framework of a deal, and we'll see if it leads to something larger. We're going to get an update from Tyler Kendall at the White House coming up in just a couple of moments. Kriti and Mike Shepard will talk to us about the TikTok deal. Also, Henrietta Levin will help to put this all together for us as we seek some answers to a lot of questions today.
Yeah, it's fascinating. This is the U.S. perspective. At the same time, in the last 24 hours, we've also heard that China, at the same time that they're talking about some deals, are also launching an antitrust probe on none other than NVIDIA.
Yeah, I think there might be some negotiations underway now, and everyone's trying to game the outcome. So we'll get to all of this, and there's, of course, stock reaction to what Kriti's talking about. We'll turn to Charlie Pellet for more on the markets right now. He's live at World Headquarters in New York. Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, and happy Monday to you both. Right now we have got the Dow Jones Industrial Average just turning lower, down 7, little change. Perhaps the key takeaway here at midday, but the S&P keeps on going higher. Another record there. NASDAQ also advancing, another record as well. Right to the numbers with the S&P 500 index at 6609, up 25 points. That is a gain of 0.4%. Dow Industrials down 7, little change. The NASDAQ Composite Index up 175, up by about 0.8%. Our Mag 7 index is surging 2% right now. 10-year yield 4.03% with the 2-year 3.53%. Gold up $37 the ounce. Spot gold now higher by 1%, $36.81 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 1%, $63.29 a barrel. Bitcoin right now at 114,700. Bitcoin down by 1%. Tesla CEO Elon Musk making news this morning, buying about $1 billion worth of shares, sending the stock soaring. According to an SEC filing, the billionaire bought the shares indirectly through a revocable trust on September 12th. The purchase amounts to a show of confidence in Tesla's prospects after a challenging first half of the year in which vehicle deliveries slumped 13% worldwide. But Tesla shares, they are surging now by 5.1%. Again, recapping, the Dow trading lower, S&P, NASDAQ, they are both at records, S&P up by about 0.4%. Balance of Power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Mathieu and Kriti Gupta.
All right, Charlie, many thanks. Charlie Pellet will be back in about 20 minutes with another look at Wall Street as we make our way through this Monday. Thank you for being with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Connecting the dots between Washington and Wall Street, frequently our job today, and there's been a lot of news specifically coming out of the White House that has investors' attention. We're going to start talking in a moment with Mike Shepard about a potential TikTok deal, but it's in fact the corporate reporting structure, Kriti, that has people's attention today. Donald Trump on Truth Social suggesting that companies should only have to report twice a year instead of 4.
I mean, this truly is a blast from the past. I think I was listening to you in your last hour. This is a law from 1934 where tariffs were very much in the picture, except going in the opposite direction. So I'm curious what prompted this latest move.
The idea, of course, transparency. Investors want to have as much information as they can. But of course, in other cases, companies might have a different feel for that. But yes, it goes back to a law, 1934, and it's something that Donald Trump already suggested doing in 2018. The SEC began a review on this that brought us to this point now. And Tyler Kendall is watching this for us live from the North Lawn of the White House with the latest on everything coming out of the administration today. Tyler, what do we know?
Yeah, hey, Joe. Well, you hit it. Really the big headline today coming from this post earlier this morning amid a slew of posts on Truth Social. But the one that caught our attention is President Trump saying that companies shouldn't be forced to deliver these earning reports on a quarterly basis, saying he prefers a 6-month schedule. Now, this proposal from the president isn't necessarily new. He did float it during his first term in 2018. And at the time, there actually was a public comment period put forth by the SEC, and our analysts point out that market participants actually said that they prefer the status quo, and ultimately any potential change didn't come to fruition. Our analysts at Bloomberg Intelligence, including our very own Nathan Dean, say that this does have a likelihood, though, and potentially could hit the books by 2027. Just looking at past views from the SEC chair, Paul Atkins, this does appear to be something that they could be open to, but any change wouldn't be immediate. And there's sort of two ways that they could go about this. One, it could require Congress, but the other and probably more logistically feasible option would be that the SEC would have to approve this. They Republicans currently hold a 3-to-1 majority there, but this isn't something that President Trump could do unilaterally. But I will point out one really important part of this post from President Trump, and I know you're going to dive into all the developments today later this hour, but President Trump tied this to our competition with China, and I think perhaps there could be a little bit of a timeline question here. Of course, President Trump's post coming as those negotiators are in Madrid, and it's clearly been on the president's mind. Joe and Kriti, of course, another big headline today from those Truth Social posts, President Trump announcing that he's going to own a phone call with Chinese President Xi Jinping on Friday.
Well, Tyler, one eye on China for sure, certainly until Friday, 4 days away. But let's talk about what's happening in the next 24 hours, and that's the Federal Reserve meeting. Is Lisa Cook going to be in that meeting or not? When do we find out, Tyler?
Well, that's going to be one of the big questions. We're waiting for an appeals court to rule potentially as soon as today. That's what the White House would like to see. They sort of put forth a last-ditch effort last night, a last-minute court filing to the court on Sunday night, asking them to rule on their appeal of the decision from a lower court judge that says that Lisa Cook can retain her position on the FOMC while the broader questioning of her firing plays out in court. We're going to have to see how that shakes out. If it doesn't go in the Trump administration's favor, they're very likely to appeal this to the Supreme Court. But as of now, she can attend that meeting. Perhaps the other question is whether or not Stephen Myron will be there. Kriti, later today, the Senate is set to vote on his confirmation. He looks very likely to have a seat at the table. A senior Republican aide to leadership tells me the GOP is prepared to kick it into overdrive to get this done by today. Right now, we're tracking at about 8 p.m. Eastern vote.
Great to know. Tyler, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, our Washington correspondent at the White House, where we're just starting to see some leaves start to fall. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kriti, Gupta in Washington. Keeping China in mind, we've seen a lot of headlines about TikTok. The president himself taking to Truth Social to talk about what could be the framework for a deal here, one that he was just talking about a short time ago, but it was the Treasury Secretary who actually hammered out this framework. He's overseas for talks. Let's listen to what Scott Besson said this morning.
We have a framework for a TikTok deal. The two leaders, President Trump and Party Chair Xi, will speak on Friday to complete the deal, but we do have a framework for a deal with TikTok.
Of course, a framework is not a deal, and we try to figure out where we should, how we should define this and how we should frame this with the help of Michael Shepard. He's with us in Washington as well. Bloomberg senior editor for technology and strategic industries. Shep, what do we make of this? That's something we haven't talked about in a while. How would this be valued? And presumably the Chinese government would approve of this?
Oh, they would have to approve. Yeah. The technology that ByteDance has developed and owned, that is the algorithm software that drives the recommendations to users that have made the app so appealing and so valuable, that's considered critical technology. And leadership in Beijing would have to sign off on any such deal. Mm-hmm. And ByteDance is also viewed as one of the national champions of China's tech economy. And so therefore, any big transaction involving that company and that sensitive technology would need to be blessed at a pretty senior level. And it is clearly going all the way up to Xi Jinping with the final details on this framework to be ironed out by the two leaders on Friday.
Let's talk about one of the national champions right here stateside, and that's NVIDIA. Because on the one hand, we're getting this olive branch, it feels like, or perhaps progress on the relationship between the United States and China. On the other hand, an antitrust probe on NVIDIA. What do we make of that?
Well, that is a big to be sure in this broader conversation about trade and the relationship between the U.S. and China. That on the one hand, while President Donald Trump is getting his wish for an agreement that would allow TikTok to continue operating within the U.S. and comply with the 2024 law that required to ByteDance to divest itself of those U.S. operations. On the other hand, we also have this antitrust probe of NVIDIA. It's unclear what the consequences of that will be. China has not spelled out what the penalties could be for NVIDIA, what it means in terms of NVIDIA's ambitions to start selling, a China-specific model of its advanced Blackwell AI chip. Remember, the U.S. had paused sales of the H20 from NVIDIA. This is the chip that was tailor-made to comply with previous U.S. restrictions on the sales of AI chips to China. That had been paused by Trump. It more recently was allowed to resume. And yet now China has also expressed concerns about that accelerator and whether it could be sold in the market. So there is a lot of uncertainty surrounding NVIDIA's re-entry into sales of its AI products in the China market right now. And that is going to be another factor in the talks between Xi and the president on Friday.
You tend to think investors have high hopes for that meeting. Right now, NVIDIA is down 49 cents. It's been down fractionally all day. You'd think maybe, Kriti, that might have a slightly more meaningful move. We saw bigger losses in the pre-market. Mike Shepard, thank you so much, Shep, as always, for the update here as we seek insights from Henrietta Levin, the senior fellow with the Freeman Chair in China Studies at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, is with us right now on Bloomberg TV and radio. Henrietta, thanks for joining us as we look back at Donald Trump's post on Truth Social about China. He says the big trade meeting in Europe between the U.S. and China has gone very well. He talks about the TikTok deal in here without actually mentioning the company. He says a company young people in our country will very much want to save. And he says the relationship between the U.S. and China remains a very strong one. Is that how you see it?
I may see a little more, let's say, dynamism in the U.S.-China relationship over strength. But thank you so much for having me. I think it is interesting. I mean, even when we think about how Secretary Bessent described exactly those trade talks, he seemed to say they didn't talk much about trade, that this was mostly about this TikTok framework deal. And even that alone speaks to, I think, some of the significant obstacles that stand in the way of a more stable U.S.-China relationship.
Henrietta, Xinhua, a Chinese newspaper, had put out the idea that part of those trade negotiations was bringing down barriers of investment to Chinese investors. Is the United States ready for more Chinese investment when it's been such a sticking point up till now?
Well, President Trump has expressed strong opposition and support for Chinese investment in the United States, at some times seeming to encourage Chinese investment and at other times describing it as a national security risk. And so I think that's part of why we're all watching so closely what this call between President Xi and President Trump that Secretary Bessent promised on Friday. If it happens, the Chinese have not confirmed it, but if it happens, that will be a very significant moment in the relationship because clearly Trump's mood, his perspective on his personal relationship with Xi can make a big difference in which direction he chooses to go among these somewhat conflicting China strategies that he seems to be pursuing sometimes at the same time.
Well, I'm confused, Henrietta, because there was another Truth post from just 2 days ago in which the president of the United States called on European nations to stop buying oil from Russia. He says he's going to hold off on secondary sanctions until then. And in that same post, he says, I believe this plus NATO as a group placing 50 to 100% tariffs on China to be fully withdrawn after the war with Russia and Ukraine has ended will also be a great help in ending this deadly but ridiculous war. He goes on to say China has strong control, even grip over Russia, and these powerful tariffs will break that grip. Which side of his mouth is he talking out of here when he prepares to talk with President Xi on Friday? You can't have both, can you?
It's a very difficult needle to thread. It is good to hear President Trump raising concerns about China's decisive role in Russia's ability to continue fighting the war in Ukraine. China's systematic support for Russia in terms of financial support, evading U.S. sanctions, economic support, its support for the Russian military as well. I mean, this is what Putin needs to continue replenishing his forces when he takes battlefield losses. And so it's an important issue. It's hard to know whether President Trump is making a serious push in the G7 on this. I tend to think if he was serious, he'd be talking about financial sanctions, especially on Chinese banks, measures the Europeans have already started to move ahead with, those banks that are responsible for actually processing the transactions that allow Chinese goods to get to the Russian military. I think that would be a really important step. I worry that this talk about tariffs may not be serious. It may be intended more as short-term leverage in Trump's effort to get a better deal with China on unrelated issues. We've seen the U.S. is unable to sustain very high levels of tariffs on China, in part because China has so effectively retaliated with the choke points on rare earth exports. And so it's difficult to see how this would play out differently now that we're having the conversation in a G7 context.
Henrietta, I love that you hit that, because it feels like one of the big narratives as well swirling around is that China has been preparing for this reality for months, years, if not decades, of kind of weaning themselves off economically of the American consumer. Ultimately, is China in a position where they can digest and continue to operate with 100% tariffs placed on them by President Trump?
I think that China's making the bet, and they may be right, that they can last longer. If Trump moves ahead with 100% tariffs, China retaliates with its own equal tariff rate, as well as we have to assume another round of restrictions on the export of rare earth magnets, earth materials. China thinks that they will hurt. They will take economic losses, but they'll take less than the U.S. And they think that politically they can absorb those losses longer and better than America can. And so they feel like they have the upper hand in any of these conversations around tariffs.
Assuming this meeting takes place on Friday, how low should our expectations be?
Always low. But it's still important. Whenever the leader of the United States and China speak, that's an important moment in the relationship, especially now that President Trump has taken such a personalized approach to U.S.-China relations. And of course, President Xi, for his part, has assumed an unprecedented degree of power within the Chinese political system. So it's important that they talk. It will also be interesting to see how they both describe what was discussed. We remember the last time Trump and Xi spoke, the readouts from the two sides looked like they were referring to totally different conversations. And so that said to me that even though, it's good that they're talking, if they don't agree what they're talking about, that itself can become a point of tension down the line in the relationship. Mm-hmm.
Really great to have you with us. Henrietta Levin, Senior Fellow, Freeman Chair in China Studies at CSIS. Don't be a stranger. We appreciate your view. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kriti Gupta in Washington as we unpack the weekend and a very busy morning for the president on social media. Much more to follow with our political panel. Jeanne, Zaino, and Maura Gillespie are with us today. They're up next as we turn our attention to what's happening in the Middle East. You'll only find it here on Bloomberg. Indeed, I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kriti Gupta in for Kaylee Lines today on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio, unpacking a lot of headlines. It's been a pretty busy Monday here in Washington, D.C., even as lawmakers prepare to get back to work here. The president has been feeding the beast. And we spent a lot of time toward the end of last week, Kriti, talking about the incursion into Polish airspace that Russia provoked with a massive drone swarm and actually forced Poland and allies to shoot down those drones. raising new questions again about security on the eastern front of NATO. Poland is a country that we've been watching very closely alongside Ukraine in this war with Russia.
They've absorbed a lot of the refugees that have been coming out of Ukraine, fleeing the warfare there. They've also, since that incident, invoked Article 4, which requires military consultations about how to proceed should they need to take more active steps beyond just shooting down the drones.
Right.
In the meantime, over the weekend, we also heard from Romania having a similar experience.
Yeah, that Article 4 was a critical development for Poland, of course, knowing the role that it plays in NATO, and of course its geography with relation to Ukraine. It is also the feedstock for weapon shipments to Ukraine. This is the pathway to get to Kyiv. So we think about Poland in a certain regard when it comes to geopolitics, but when it comes to economics, this is a really interesting piece here that Matthew Winkler has put together on the terminal. Poland is becoming a pillar of the economy in Europe. The headline, Poland's economy defies Putin's threats. Matthew Winkler, editor-in-chief emeritus of Bloomberg News, is with us right now to talk about it. Mr. Winkler, it's great to have you, as always, on Balance of Power here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Does this come despite or because of its position in Europe, politically and geographically?
Well, pleasure to be with you. And the reality is that if you want to understand Poland's ascendance, it's really a validation of the single market, the European markets, free movement of goods, capital, services, people between the member states. And the country's resilience, and you know the history, several partitions, many occupations. But today, Poland is really a data-driven rebuke of all the anti-EU groups that paved the way for Brexit in 2016. And interestingly enough, since that referendum in 2016, Poland actually has become the juggernaut that you referenced among the 26 members of the EU. And that, of course, was when the UK voted to leave the EU. And what has happened since is that the Polish economy has accelerated. For what it's worth, for the first time ever, this country of 38 million people, 915 billion in gross domestic product, that's dollars. It's going to expand 3.3% in 2026, 3.2% in 27. That's according to the economist forecast compiled by Bloomberg. Whereas the EU GDP on average will show gains of 1.4% and 1.7%, and Russia's even behind that considerably. So Poland stands really out. It is outstanding as an economy. And in fact, what's really interesting is that while Putin couldn't have been more pleased by what Brexit has wrought, or especially the UK, but Europe too, for that matter, Poland is actually the biggest beneficiary, and its economy, or GDP, is expanding 8 consecutive years since 16, as I mentioned, and it's poised to keep growing for another 3 years. So that prosperity, by the way, is unprecedented. What has happened as well is that if you recall, the Brexit referendum was much about, all these people coming from everywhere stealing our jobs, and the Polish plumber was one of those people derided as such, even though all the evidence points to the contrary, that such labor was actually a boost to the European economy. In any case, what has happened since is that returning Poles who once went solo as unskilled labor to the rest of Europe, they've now come back and they're multi-skilled. They're coming back as professionals in education, in food production, healthcare, transportation. And you could say there's been a reverse brain drain that Poland is the beneficiary of. And this, by the way, is in the context of its own declining population. Poland does have a problem like so many developed countries. Women are past the point of fertility in many cases. And so Poland has to deal with issues that many developed countries do. But in spite of that, the labor force in Poland is ebullient, robust, And as we've said, it's performing. And by the way, one indication of that is the zloty. The Polish zloty is the best performing currency among 23 most traded in emerging markets. It's appreciated 14% against the dollar since Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th, 2022. Polish bonds are also superior in Europe. If you go and look at who's borrowing, the Polish borrowers have actually been the ones that have benefited the most. Investors have benefited the most from the return. The total return on Polish government securities is 31% when you combine income plus appreciation. And, that's the most of 30 European governments, again, according to data compiled by Bloomberg. And then there's the stock market, which we track, large and mid-cap companies. That Polish stock market is up 49% this year in dollar terms, and it's number 6 among 46 major countries. So that's nothing to sneeze at. And more than 40% of the Polish market is represented by financial companies, 35 financial companies, and they're all beating their peers. And what's even more remarkable is that if you look at the math of Polish equity right now, which is essentially the banks that are performing, they're a bargain still. They're only 1.7 times for their net assets compared with 4.7 for the benchmark. So, all in all, when you look at Poland, you say, gosh, this is the avatar of what the EU was meant to be, and it is strutting its stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, no doubt. You've laid it out quite clearly just how much they've outperformed their European counterparts. But Matt, we got to connect to the broader European story, because in addition to all the other wins you've just laid out, Poland is one of the few, I believe the only, who's beating their NATO targets relative to the other members in NATO. What are the lessons here that France, Germany, Italy need to be gaining when it comes to those contributions that Poland has set forth?
Well, I would say Poland has been in this respect fearless. And if you have to criticize the two, if you like, founders of the EU, Germany and France, they have characteristically been fearful about so many things and not willing to take the risks, especially with respect to Russia historically. Germany has had economic ties with Russia right up until its invasion of Ukraine. And it's only belatedly that both Europe and Russia have recognized what Poland and Finland and some of the other Eastern European countries have known all along, which is you can't take your democracy for granted. You can't assume that it isn't threatened on a day-to-day basis. And so Poland is obviously very much aware of that because it's literally on the border, and it's also on the border of Ukraine. If you're thinking about what comes next with respect to Ukraine, you have to look at Poland. And, fortunately, I say fortunately, it looks as if the European community gets that and is willing to belatedly take some risks, as they did immediately with shooting down the drones last week that Russia sent to Poland.
Matt Winkler, many thanks for being with us to talk about your piece. He's Bloomberg's editor-in-chief emeritus, and we'll point you back to it on the terminal and online. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kriti Gupta in Washington as we balance a couple of hot spots in the world, not only the war in Ukraine, but the war in Gaza. And of course, it was one, Kriti, that we saw kind of get into a new space last week when Israel decided to deliver airstrikes against Doha in Qatar. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State today, weighing in on all of this in a pretty important moment here, refraining from criticizing Israel from its missile strike in Qatar, at one point saying what happened has happened. We're focused on what happens now and what happens next. Let's assemble our political panel. Jeanne Zaino is with us, our Democratic analyst, Bloomberg politics contributor, and democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. Republican strategist Maura Gillespie is with us as well, founder of Bluestack Strategies and a veteran of John Boehner's Speaker's Office. Jeanne, I'm guessing this is not what you wanted to hear from the Secretary of State. The President of the United States says he called Benjamin Netanyahu and received assurances that this would not happen again. Is that good enough?
You know, I don't think so. Number one, I do give credit to the president for sending Marco Rubio to talk to Benjamin Netanyahu because, you know, we have had a very willing, inexperienced Steve Witkoff acting as the ambassador and trying to do a Herculean task in handling so many of these issues. I mean, you were just talking about Poland, Ukraine, Russia. He's been going back and forth. So it is good that they are using Marco Rubio's talents in this way. But I don't think it's enough. The reality is what happened last week is that Donald Trump issued a warning to Hamas and said, if you don't accept a negotiated settlement, this is the end. And they gathered together in Qatar and are decapitated almost completely by our closest ally. And there's only two options. One is Israel is acting like a cowboy going out on his own and acting, and we are its main supplier and supporter monetarily and otherwise. That's a problem. The other reality is the one most people suspect, which is that they alerted Donald Trump and the administration, hence the tepid response afterwards and Marco Rubio. Both are very, very distressing realities, because what it suggests is that it is not Hamas that doesn't want to negotiate. It is Israel. They do not want a negotiated settlement, which is quite apart from anything the United States has said, at least to this point, that it wants. And so the Trump administration has a lot of explaining to do as to what happened, what they knew when, and how we're going to respond to this kind of action by one of our closest allies.
Maura, weigh in here. Is Marco Rubio's visit to Qatar enough to kind of maybe dissuade some of the confusion, some of the anger coming from specifically military families that a base, a U.S. base, a country with a U.S. base can be subject to these kind of attacks?
I think Marco Rubio's presence, you know, as Jeanne mentioned, it provides a more stabilizing impact than having the envoy of Steve Witkoff, who has just been all over the map, quite literally, just talking with Putin and talking with Israel and just all the various rooms that he has been in and having conversations. I think it's helpful to have somebody who, like Marco Rubio, who is a more stabilizing presence and has a better handle on the issues, quite frankly. And so that's a helpful point there for the administration to say, hey, listen, we're going to listen. We hear you. This is concerning for us, for military families. This certainly wasn't something that we wanted to happen, X, Y, Z. But I would say also, on the point about negotiating with Hamas, I mean, Hamas does a lot of these things to make the rest of us think that Israel is the monster, right? This is part of their tactics. And when I think about those hostages that have been there and those who were killed on October 7th, it's really hard to understand how not to understand that Israel is having a hard time trying to negotiate with a terrorist organization that has created such chaos in this world and has used their own people as pawns, as shields, and has starved them to their own benefit because they know that's the only negotiating tactic that they have. So I think this is a bigger issue. There's more factors at play here than simply the optics.
To what extent was a ceasefire delayed by that action last week, Jeanne?
Oh, I think dramatically. Who can they now negotiate with if they want to? I'm struck and just thinking about over the weekend, Representative Mike McCall, a Republican, saying he is stepping down. And in his statement, after his statement, rather, he went on one of the Sunday shows and warned about the World War III version of what can be happening when you take into account what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening in Ukraine. So these are very scary times. If we want a settlement, we have to depend on our closest ally in Israel to be doing that in good faith. And it is hard to believe at this point that that is what they were doing when they attacked Qatar and well, not attacked Qatar, but attacked Hamas in Qatar. And as Kriti mentioned, so close to a U.S. base. So very concerning and puts us much further away from peace than we would otherwise be at this point.
Maura, we're a few days away from a phone call between Donald Trump and President Xi Jinping of China. I'm curious, do you think the developments in the Middle East and this latest strike into Qatar will show up and be prominent on that phone call?
I don't think it serves China to bring it up because China's playing a game with the United States that, unfortunately, we have not really wrapped our heads around quite yet, especially when it comes to how we use our U.S. diplomacy. When you talk about foreign aid, and I know that Republicans have had issue with it, but when you think about it as a tool, as an art of diplomacy and as a tool of diplomacy, having a gap there and having a vacuum for people like China to swoop in and show that they are the leaders, that they are the number one ally that countries should be seeking out because they're going to step in and help, that's a concern for the United States. And so the more chaos that is sown around the world, China actually benefits from. They succeed when the rest of us are in chaos in the throes of it. So I don't see how this conversation would then lend itself to them wanting to help. In terms of us, they may want to go insert themselves into areas where there is hopelessness and provide the foreign aid that we have taken out, but it's only for their own advantageous, positioning in the world stage. It's not about anything else other than that.
Really interesting conversation with Jeanne, Zaino, and Maura Gillespie. We thank you both for a great panel. Bloomberg Politics contributor Jeanne, Zaino, Maura Gillespie at Bluestack Strategies. We thank you, as always, for the insights. We'll have another panel for you tomorrow. Helping us understand and hash out the news of the day, helping us understand the markets right now is our good friend Charlie Pellet. Let's go to World Headquarters in New York for the latest on the Monday trade. Charlie, where should we start?
Right now, we got a lot of moving parts. However, the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing on this back-to-work Monday. It has been a rocky session for the Dow, swinging between gains and losses. Right now, though, up 34, up 0.1%. S&P on track for a record close, up 27, up 0.4. We've got NASDAQ up 173. Also at a record, up now by 0.8%. Your 10-year 4.02% with a 2-year 3.53%. Gold up 1.1%, 36.81 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.2%, 63.44 a barrel. And Bitcoin now down 0.8%, 114,915 on Bitcoin. Bottom line here, stocks higher and trading at a record. Balance of Power continues right now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Kriti, Gupta, and Joe Mathieu.
All right, Charlie, many thanks. Live from World Headquarters in New York, Charlie Pellet watching Wall Street for us every day here on Balance of Power as we talk politics and policy in Washington. Easy for me to say. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kriti Gupta, who's in for Kaylee Lyons today in Washington. Kriti, we've spent a lot of time talking about health care coming out of the debate surrounding the president's big, beautiful bill, the debate around even how to frame changes to Medicare that some call cuts and others call efficiencies. And we've got another big moment coming up here at the end of the year with the expiration of Obamacare or Affordable Care Act subsidies expiring that could, in fact, provide a path. I know I'm reaching a little bit further here, but a path to a deal, and to fund the government. We've asked a lot of lawmakers about this over the past couple of weeks, and we wake up this morning and read the tip sheets, and people seem to think that we're going to have a shutdown. But if there is some common ground found following the rescissions and all the rest of the things, it might in fact be the subsidies for Obamacare.
Yeah, the extension's there, but is it enough to have an extension beyond even just the winter, which is what we're eyeing here? Sprinkled on top of all of that is just where we get our healthcare guidance from.
Well, that's for sure. And recalling the testimony from RFK Jr. recently, that was a big part of the conversation here in Washington, which is why it's a pleasure to introduce you to Paul Markovich. It's a conversation that we've been looking forward to here on Balance of Power. He's the Chief Executive Officer, President of Ascendiun, which just announced its formation as the parent company for Blue Shield of California. Paul, it's great to see you in our studio. Thank you for coming in.
Joe, Kriti, thanks so much for having me.
Well, there's a lot that we could talk about here, and I'd like to just start broadly with your parent company here now aiming to cut bureaucracy and cover more people. Mm-hmm. Is that in line with the goals of this Department of Health and Human Services?
I think that it is. I mean, I think what what I see from this group, I give them high marks for urgency and ambition, particularly when it comes to technology. We're seeing a lot of initiatives coming out of that agency trying to drive the adoption of technology. And I think with that has the opportunity to reduce a lot of the administrative bureaucracy and burdens that we face day to day, and to help us save some money.
In the last, I want to say, month or so, we heard about the formation of the West Coast Alliance, several states that are talking about providing healthcare policy as a alternative to what we're hearing out of Health and Human Services here in Washington. Is that where you're deriving your healthcare policy from?
Well, when it comes to things like vaccines, which is what they're focused on right now, nonprofit Blue Shield of California is going to follow state law, and state law right now is really clear that there's a whole series of vaccines that are covered, and that will include COVID when the governor signs a bill that just passed the legislature on that front. So I think irrespective of that coalition, California has been pretty clear, at least when it comes to vaccines, on what health plans need to cover and don't, and we will always follow the law, both federal and state law. It'll be interesting to see how this coalition evolves and the other kinds of issues that may come up along the way. It's a little hard to predict, but right now it's really focused on vaccines.
I mentioned the expiration of Obamacare subsidies. Your largest business, Blue Shield of California, as we mentioned, signed on with a group, Keep Americans Covered. And you were out with a letter, in fact, in August, warning of the health care cliff, as some are now calling it, if Affordable Care Act credits are not extended. Where's your head on this right now? The debate is underway as we speak. Do you think they will be? What would happen if they were not?
Well, I would love to have a crystal ball and be able to predict what's going to happen. I think I don't know what's going to happen. I think there's enough, there's a really intense dialogue, I think, going on both sides of that question. From our vantage point, like, we're a nonprofit, mission-driven organization. We would like to see everyone covered. We talk about creating a healthcare system that's worthy of our family and friends and sustainably affordable for everyone. And so anytime I think you're reducing the amount of subsidy that anyone receives to help pay for health care, particularly those of lower income, you're going to end up losing people from coverage if you do. And there's just no getting around that equation. The problem right now is just health care is just too damn expensive. I mean, it costs so much money that the average American simply cannot afford the average premium without a subsidy. Wow. And we need to address that. I mean, let's just be clear, like, we can't keep going the way that we're going. And so I think for those that are concerned about subsidies, I understand the argument, which is to say that we really are bankrupting this country with the way healthcare costs have been, where they are now and where they're growing. So we do need to address that. But I don't think the way to address that is to take people off the rolls. I think the way to address that is to get to some of the administrative efficiencies and improvements in care that will help make it more affordable over time.
Can you get to that end goal without doing the intermediate step of not extending some of that coverage? Is it possible to find the kind of best case scenario and the cheaper healthcare alternative without pulling back on some of those costs first?
Well, I think, look, healthcare's got a productivity problem. We just keep throwing more resources into it, and we're not getting a better product out of it. Like, at the macro level, there's some brilliant things that happen on the ground with any particular patient at any particular time. But when you look at the macro, the last 20 years, wages have gone up about 3% a year. Healthcare costs have averaged 6 to 8% a year. Wow. That's just not something you can continue forever. And so, and a lot of it has to do with, we just keep throwing more resources at things. And like, we still use fax machines. Like, when you go get your MRI or a test, they'll hand you a CD-ROM. I mean, there's a reason this administration has a kill the clipboard initiative, because we're still using clipboards to fill out information. How many times when you go to the hospital, as I do with my son, who was in the emergency room a few months ago with appendicitis, get asked the same question 6 or 7 times. And so a lot of this is just, it's not necessarily even about the clinical care. We're massively inefficient from an administrative standpoint, and there's no reason, Kriti, to your your question, that we can't pass a law that says every American ought to have access to a comprehensive real-time digital health record on their phone or their favorite tablet. They do it in every other aspect of their life. That can lead to huge efficiencies administratively, not to mention a way better experience for the average American.
Really interesting. As a parent who's brought a child to the ER with appendicitis, I see you, and I hope everybody's okay. You've said a couple of things, including healthcare bankrupting America as we know it at some point here in the future. And it brings me to the fireside chat that we saw you deliver at the America's Health Insurance Plans lobbying group here. You talked about a cliff, separate from the Obamacare cliff that people have established at the end of the year. You said, we don't know how far away it is. We just don't know when we're going to fall over the edge. Let me put it another way. Your business in healthcare is not sustainable if the industry is not sustainable. If that's your perspective, who's to blame and how do you fix that? Is it possible to avert the cliff?
It is possible to avert the cliff. I think everybody is a part of the problem and everybody's a part of the solution.
Wow.
Health plans, hospitals, physicians, pharmaceutical companies, everyone in the industry right now are not doing all the things that they should be doing. And yet they're also doing some things that are really contributing positively. At the end of the day, this system is fundamentally flawed. We pay by the volume, and we pay for volume. If you're going to get paid as a physician, you have to see people and have office visits, or you need to do surgeries. If you're a hospital, you need to keep people in the hospital or have them use the different services. If you're a pharmaceutical company, you need to get, everything's about volume, and so we churn out as more volume, but not necessarily better outcomes. So that system needs to shift. There's three things that need to happen. We need to pay people differently so that we're paying for outcomes, better healthcare, not more healthcare. We need to make it digital and simple, like I mentioned before, and take a lot of administrative cost out of the system. And then finally, we need to truly personalize it. And I do think that there's both technology and other processes that can help us do that today.
You mentioned some of the pharmacies as perhaps one component of the issue. It's been brought to our attention that you have recently cut CVS Caremark from your business and are purchasing directly from drug manufacturers. Can you just explain the logic of that move and why more of your peers in the space aren't doing the same?
Well, this space is the classic example of more is better as opposed to better is better, because you have a situation where there's multiple players in the distribution system between the pharmacy manufacturer and the patient, and they all get paid more money when we sell or administer a higher volume of more expensive drugs. So guess what we do? We sell a higher volume of more expensive drugs. Great example, Humira is an injectable drug that's used for things like rheumatoid arthritis. It is the single drug in 2024 that Blue Shield of California spent the most money on. It lost its market exclusivity in early 2023, which meant that companies could offer what are called biosimilars that could effectively do the same thing because there was no longer a patent exclusivity on that drug, and potentially introduce competition, which they did. We ended up, as a result of this model that you mentioned, contracting directly to get the drug. So Humira in 2024, the list price was around $7,000 per month. The net price was around $2,100 a month, which means when you take all the rebates and fees out that were going through all these intermediaries, the actual reimbursement to the manufacturer was around $2,100. We negotiated a deal for $545. Wow. And so that's the kind of thing that's going on. But at the same time, in 2024, despite the fact that these deals were out there, Humira had more than 90% market share for that drug. And that's because all the players were getting rewarded for selling and administering a more expensive drug when there were less expensive options available.
What do you do with GLP-1s? $1,000 a month for Zepbound. Right. If this drug class is truly about to go mainstream, does this break the back in a similar way?
Well, it's just too expensive right now. I mean, it's when you think about it, and I was talking to a group of drug manufacturers recently about this. Like the average total insurance premium per person that Blue Shield collected for people that get their insurance through their employer in 2024 was around $330 a month. Okay. This drug is being priced at more than that per month for one patient. So there's simply no way economically that you can cover the drug at that price for all the people that would like to get access to it. And keep it economically sustainable. But to me, this is an opportunity. This is an example of an opportunity to say, well, let's think about a different payment model. If we were to think about a way to pay the manufacturer to actually help people lose weight and get healthier and get their costs down, as opposed to every time you sell a pill or an injectable, you get more money, then there's a way for them to get rewarded financially for helping, but only when they help people actually get healthier, when they help them lose weight. Because one of the challenges we've seen with these drugs is not just their total cost, but there's a lot of people that start on the drug and then come off, and then they don't get the benefits of it. So you get the cost up front, you really don't get the benefits of it in the system, and ultimately what you're looking for is these drugs they're incredible innovations. They have a tremendous potential positive impact on healthcare for people. We want people in the right circumstances to access them, but we want them to get the benefit of it.
Really interesting. This is a story that's not going away, Paul, and we'd love to stay in touch with you on this. Thank you for coming to visit us. Paul Markovich, the company is Ascendiun. He is president and CEO, and we learned a lot today, Kriti, when it comes to all of these issues. We still have to figure out this Obamacare expiration at the end of the year. It's, as Paul mentioned, in the throes of debate on Capitol Hill right now.
Not to mention that, plus there's always a tariff question. A lot of these drugs that Paul was just talking about, they come from Europe, they come from Switzerland, they come from India, they come from Denmark. The
president's still promising pharma tariffs. We haven't gotten there quite yet. But we will meet you back, hopefully with more information, back here for the late edition of Balance of Power. It starts at 5 p.m. Eastern Time alongside Kriti Gupta. I'm Joe Mathieu. We'll see you then, only here on Bloomberg TV and radio.